going on? This is the NOC, the Nerds of Color. We are back with another ShoPowSho. I am Kuya P, aka the Tocino Terminator, the Babinka Boy, the Lechon something. I had something with that, but I forgot it. Who knows? But I can't do this alone. I have the amazing Ates, Catafork, and Viva Valentino, the Lechon ladies. There you go. Hey, Lechon ladies.
Lechon ladies. I'll take it. I'll take it. I love Lechon.
So how y'all doing tonight?
I'm doing all right.
Doing good.
Yeah.
All right. Well, tonight we have another amazing one. Author. He has a book called Vampires in Portlandia. He's done a lot of work. He's also done what we do. He's interviewed a lot of amazing folks in his time. So we're going to get the whole story. Please welcome Jason Tanamor. Air horns. How you doing, sir?
Doing well. How you doing?
Good. There's a little bit of a delay there. Good to see you, man. Oregon in the house. The Ducks, right? It's the Ducks.
Oregon Ducks.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right. Coming all the way from the West Coast. We're East Coast tribe over here. I'm in DC, and the Ates are down in Virginia Beach. So thank you for making time for us to tell your story. So I'm going to pass it on to Viva Valentina with our first question out the gate.
So we always like to know, where are you from and where are your parents from? But really
my parents were from Manila, and to be honest, I don't know a lot because I was born in the States. I was actually born in Iowa City, Iowa. My parents came over on Christmas Eve, 1974.
Wow.
And I was born in April 75. And a lot of people ask how we ended up in Iowa, of all places. And I think my parents just ran out of gas. You know, if they had $10 more in the gas can, I'd probably be from Missouri or something. But really is just like any community, there's a Filipino association that they had a lot of friends come over. And so I was born and raised on the border of Iowa and Illinois. And so that was, back in the Midwest, it was just, there's nothing really going on in Iowa. And so like a lot of traditional Filipino kids, it was the one thing I knew I was going to go to college. That was it. But I didn't know what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to, I loved doing entertaining things, and a lot of things I found interested in. I played guitar for a long time. I played pool and billiards for a long time, did stand up for a while. I never knew you could do that though, as a Filipino kid. And so my mother was an accountant for the Department of Army. She worked on an Army base in Rock Island, Illinois. And when it was time for me to go to school, it was just go for accounting. And I'm like, all right, whatever. I didn't know there was anything else I could do. So I did that, graduated with the degree in accounting, and then practiced at an accounting firm. And I hated it. I did nothing creative while I was working, and it really just got depressed. So I started dabbling in writing and doing stand-up a little bit. And I met, at the time, the newspaper there, the arts and entertainment editor. And we kind of became friends. And one day he emailed me and he said, hey, do you want to do some writing? And I said, writing for a newspaper. I mean, as long as it's not like obituaries or boring, and he's like, no, I think I need someone to cover the stand-up comedy circuit and random music that come into town. Now, where I came from, not like here in Portland where, you can get 30 big names in one night. Where I'm from, if like Paul McCartney comes, they'll promote it for like 3 years, because that's just how small a town it is. That's just what it is. So I said, no, that'd be fun. And I did it for about 5 or 6 years, and it really gave me an opportunity to meet a lot of people in stand-up for the most part. And I was doing stand-up, and I thought, okay, that's kind of what I want to do. But again, like in that small town, there wasn't, we're in larger cities, you can get a comedy club every, very close. You can kind of do a lot. I had to drive an hour and a half just to tell 5 to 10 minutes sometimes. And it just became tiring, and you're telling the same jokes, and I really didn't find any satisfaction with it. So I really started just writing for the entertainment pieces for the paper, and then gradually expanded to Yahoo. And this was back in 2004. I mean, Facebook just started, and this was still like the infant stages of social media, and Yahoo was the big search engine back then. And so I did some work for them and was able to interview people I would never even imagine, like Billy Corgan and Red Hot Chili Peppers and Dane Cook. And
Love Billy Corgan.
Yeah, it was just weird. And so, but I think I really just wanted to write novels. And so that's kind of what I did. But, there's not a lot of money in it. And I mean, I have a full-time job here. So I just write basically just for my own satisfaction, but I loved doing what you guys do, interviewing, but it was a lot of work. And I remember when I was interviewing Dane Cook, it went over an hour just because he talks a lot. And I sat there with my digital recorder, and I didn't, I'm not really tech savvy. So I was dictating, after the interview, I was rewind play, typing the damn interview out. And a lot of the questions that I wanted to include, a lot of times I just gave up. I'm like, I'm not doing a 12-page interview, for a website. And so I started modifying my questions so it wouldn't go an hour. Like podcasts, that was never even a thing back then. It was, lucky to get 5 minutes on the phone with you, and then, okay, I got to type, sometimes I misquoted a bunch of people, who knows? And so, I just started modifying my questions. So the interviews were shorter, frankly, because I was lazy. I just, I love doing the creative stuff. I love talking to people and doing all that stuff, but it was just the shit work I didn't want to do. I didn't want to, I got to write the lead, and I got to, edit down to 800 words or whatever. And I hated that part. So I just started writing novels on the side, and that's what I really enjoy doing. But it got to the point where, I was married, I have a kid, we have rental property, we were both working full time, and then I was trying to write novels, and then I was trying to set up an interview with someone. As it's scheduling. It's, sometimes you're just random times of the day you're doing these things because it's based on that, and I just started spreading myself thin. So I really just kind of had to think about what I wanted to do, and I wanted to write novels. So that's what I'm kind of transitioned to.
Awesome. Yeah. Let's rewind a little bit and, talk about maybe a little more deep dive into you. So when you were first kind of growing up, you mentioned the Filipino associations. How much of a connection did you have with your Filipino side? I know we were looking at some of your interviews, and you mentioned, at least for a while there, thinking of yourself as primarily an American before Filipino. Mm-hmm. And so how did that kind of shift for you?
Well, it's funny because a book that I have finished that I'm pitching now is about a Filipino teenager who dances in Filipino folk dances, loves it, but thinks would just get bullied over it, and that was me as a kid. The Filipino Connection was the Filipino dancing troupe that I was in. And it was every year we're dancing at just various folk festivals or places that would have us. And I remember back in the day, we had this mall with this big stage in front of, I think it was like a Montgomery Ward at the time. And that's where they had like the once in a year Santa there, and, the events there. And we were dancing at the mall, and it was just something that I enjoyed doing, but I would never tell anyone about because I thought it was embarrassing. But yes, it wasn't until recently that I think it was, I don't know when it happened, but I think as a kid, it was more, I just grew up in white culture and everything. I don't speak Tagalog. I don't speak with an accent. I grew up in a small, kind of a very white town. I went to a private school where everybody was white. There was like two minority. It was me and like a Ford Festiva that the gym teacher had or something, and that was it. And so it was just my benefit to, blend in, assimilate. And it wasn't until I got older that, you start turning accepted because I missed the food more, and I'm that 40-year-old guy walking around with slippers all the time and threatening to hit you with it. So I don't know when it changed or why, but I think it was, I'm the middle kid of three brothers. And so my older one, I tried to hang out with him because he was, I thought it was cool, but he didn't want anything to do with me. My younger one was too far in age away from me, so we didn't really connect. So a lot of times I was just left by myself or with my very white friends. And in this, on Twitter a lot, I always do this, hey, Filipino Twitter, just because you just want to see if anyone has any similarities to you. And I remember one of the things I asked was, what did you think? What was one thing that you had growing up that you thought everyone had? And it was a rice cooker. And people are like, yeah, it's the same. Like, I was floored when none of my friends had rice cookers. I'm like, where's your rice cooker at? Like, how do you not, the joy of your mom saying, go get that big burlap sack of rice out from the car and carrying it in like a WWF wrestler, heaving over your shoulder was normal for me. So it was just balancing that weird thing, because when someone didn't have a rice cooker, I was like, oh, I must be different. No one has a rice cooker. So it just made it that much more beneficial for me to blend in, because I did have a bully, because I was one of the only minorities. And, I don't hate anyone for bullying anybody. It's just kids, I don't think racism is I think racism is like a tradition that you grow into. I mean, you're not born it. You just are in this, lifestyle that is conducive for it. So.
And that is why representation matters, kids.
Yeah, it is. It does. At the time, when you're a kid, though, you don't think about that stuff. You just want to get through the day.
So before, I know that you got into writing professionally through the newspaper and the interviews. Had you done any kind of writing on your own in other avenues, or just personally, even just journaling, or?
No, I used to be that. Well, I take that back. It wasn't really journaling, but my friend and I used to like Weird Al Yankovic lyrics. I don't know if anyone else did that, but we like spent weekends doing
like writing your own lyrics.
Yeah, just
that totally counts. Yeah, that totally counts.
And we would do like little skits I don't know how old you guys are, but the old camcorder that held the whole actual VHS. And I remember when Transformers, the action figures came out, we did tried doing an entire episode of cut shots of them.
Oh, did you try to do like stop motion? That's awesome.
In like 6 hours was like 30 seconds. And we're like, oh, this is awful. This is awful. And that was my version of creativity. And I had these weird dreams, like I wanted to write for like the Tonight Show or Saturday Night Live or something like that. But as again, just growing up with Asian parents, I never even thought that was possible. And I remember meeting a real life author. I'm like, what do you do? He's like, well, I write books. I'm like, well, what do you do? Like, you have to have a job, it just sort of floored me that this was what they did, because I never knew it was anything outside of just a hobby or something fun to do. Like, I remember watching HBO as a kid when my parents would go to bed, and back then I had these HBO comedy hours. And I remember, I think it was like 9 or 10, and Howie Mandel had this comedy special, and I'm like, I cannot believe that this is this guy's job. Like, this guy's job is to wear a fucking rubber glove on his head and just let it pop off. And I remember just memorizing his jokes and going and telling them to people in school, because some of them were so dirty.
Yeah. You're like, oh, it's after dark.
I don't even think I got the jokes, and some of the kids got the joke. It was just that reaction of like, holy shit, like people are actually laughing at something I said, as opposed to something I did or something Asian I did, or, asking about your fucking rice cooker or whatever. So it was just that weird conflict of identity, I think. But yeah, so that was kind of my intro to, I guess, creativity, creative world, and writing was some of it. So.
Yeah, awesome. That's something that comes up a lot in the interviews that we do, is that Asian parents, right? They have these expectations of us. Patrick's parents, they always wanted them to go off and be a doctor or a lawyer or an accountant. Accounting is on our bingo board. Like, that is a Filipino like profession. Think of it as an accountant. But like my grandparents wanted my mom to go to school to be an accountant.
Right.
And you know, they always want you to go into a successful field. So what did they want for you?
I think they just wanted me to go to something practical. And my mom was an accountant, and my dad in the Philippines, he was going to school for chemical engineering.
Oh, wow.
So this was bad. So my dad, so I don't know, I want to write a book about it. My mom grew up, her dad was Chinese, and her mom was Filipino, but he was a traditional Chinese man and had 2 wives. So he had a Chinese wife and a Filipino wife. And, talking to my mom, he would spend time month, in China and month with him. And it was just normal for her. But he was a Chinese businessman, didn't speak English, but he owned, very successful. And she worked in the movie theater that they own, the restaurant that they own, and all that. And she fell in love with my dad, who was modest. He was the oldest of 9 kids. But he was an activist. And this was back in the mid 60s and 70s when Ferdinand Marcos was president. So just the very abridged version, my dad was an activist, and he was associated with communist groups, just opposition in general, and got on Marcos's blacklist. And it got to a point where my mom's dad hated my father, didn't come from money, and dark-skinned Filipino guy. And so it got to a point where Marcos has actually raided my mom's compound, and my mom had to ask my dad for help to get passports, and her dad actually bribed one of the government officials to get their passports. And then they fled to the States in 1974.
Wow. So that's why they came over?
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. And ran out of gas.
A lot of the stuff I didn't even know. And I remember I remember when in 1986, when Marcos, when they finally got him out of power and Mrs. Aquino became president, I remember her talking, because when I was doing research for this book, I was just kind of trying to get a timeline down. And I remember vividly when I was, 86, I was about 10 years old, watching TV with my parents. And I remember them crying when Aquino was talking about bringing democracy back. And, as a 10-year-old kid born in America, no idea, what the hell was the impact, what it was. And so it was just very, very weird to me. And it wasn't until recently when I started rehearsing it or researching it. And that's one of my favorite stories I love having my mom tell. She just kind of gives you a very synopsis of what happened, and she might throw in a detail here, and it might change every now and again. It was just fascinating.
Wow.
Yeah. That's
Great.
amazing.
You got to write it down every single time.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, great.
Have they been able to go back to the Philippines since then?
Yeah, they actually went back regularly. I think February in the States was the good time of the year in the Philippines. I think it seemed like they always went for about 3 weeks to a month, and they always asked me to go, but I was an American kid. I didn't want to go, and I'd find excuses. I can't get out of school. I mean, thinking about that now is just the dumbest thing, right? So they would go back and just hop houses to each of the relatives or whatever. And I think there was a period where when they first moved here, they didn't go for a while. Like when Marcos was still there, but I think it took them almost, I want to say 15 years to go back or something. And so finally they ended up going back regularly, and I still haven't been, and I still would like to go at a point, but I now just the turmoil there, it sounds fucked up. I'm like, I don't want to go there.
Oh yeah. Super
Right.
scary now with Durate. Yeah. Woo.
Yeah, right. And so my grandmother, my dad's mom, she's the only grandparent I'd ever met. And when she moved to the States, I think when I was about 10, they brought her to the States to live with us. So she kind of raised us for the most part when my mom and dad had 2 jobs. Oh, I know. I forgot. I kind of sidetracked out that last story. But so my dad when he was in the Philippines, he went to college for chemical engineering. But when they came here, he couldn't just finish it. So he had to find something quick. So he ended up just going to welding school for like 9 months just to get a job.
Yeah.
And then my older brother was 2 or so, and then I was born. So my mom, who had the degree because she was forced to, had to stay home basically. And then so it wasn't until my younger brother was born that they moved my grandmother in because they were both working 2 jobs. What was funny about the story is that my mom she just grew up a socialite. And when she moved here, I think she was 29 or 30, she'd never learned how to drive a car. She had a driver. And my dad will tell the story. She always had help. And my dad would tell the story, men's business or like suit pants has a natural crease. My mom thought to try to iron them out because she had no idea. And my dad was like, what are you doing? That's supposed to be there. And so it was just this weird, I can't even imagine. Like my wife and I moved from Illinois to here, Portland, never being here, never ever coming here. We came for jobs and I was terrified. I can't even imagine being pregnant, having a 2-year-old, and you and your spouse just basically leaving, the Philippines to come to the States because you had some friends that lived in the Midwest that you might have known someone. Wow. I can't imagine that in the 70s.
Very brave. Very brave.
Sacrifice too.
Exactly. I feel like a shit because, for a large part of young life, I'm like, I'm not Filipino, I'm an American kid, So it's just that weird, so I don't want to say like, I feel like I'm trying to catch up, but I just feel like a shit.
Well, welcome to the ShoPowSho. This is where we're exploring our culture and celebrating, and this is the place for that. So I'm glad that you're on.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
That's exactly what we're doing and the means of this show. So yeah, that's the journey.
If there's one thing that all of our guests and that we ourselves kind of have had in common so far, it's been that like imposter syndrome. Even people who were born in the Philippines, even people who speak Tagalog or one of the other dialects, or have spent a good chunk of their lives outside of the States. Like we all have that feeling of, am I Filipino enough, or am I doing this right? Am I Filipino correctly? Like, right. And I think that's just a product of kind of the way society treats Filipinos as like a mismatch of culture, like not as a culture of their own. So
I will say this, and I've said this a lot, the way I kind of identify as a Filipino is when I'm with my parents or around other Filipino people, I feel very white. When I'm around white people, I feel very Asian. Mm-hmm. And that's really just sums up how it is, growing up as a brown skinned American kid.
And that's something to be said about assimilation and survival. Like that's kind of especially for immigrants. My mother went through it when she came to the U.S. Very young, or like in her teenage years. So I remember having a conversation with her when she was like, yeah, I mean, I didn't consider myself like a minority. I thought that like, no, I'm white. And like, it was just her way of like assimilating, was just to kind of go with the status quo. And unfortunately that's what it was. But like still kind of holding on to those Filipino roots. And then I think it just goes to show that it's never too late either to come back to it. So
yeah, real talk. So I want to go to college now, and because college is where we kind of get to leave our house and our parents and we discover ourselves. Let's get into that. How are you as a college guy? Did you find like some awakenings of the world and everything, and out from under your parents, and then finding things that you would then get into later on? Although I think I've read some of your other interviews, so I already kind of know stuff. But if you can tell your story of going to college and discovering yourself, and then what then eventually leading into writing. And I know you said you got to dabble in the comedy, but just get into that a little bit from there. More discovery of Jason Tanamor.
When I have 2 bachelor degrees, one in accounting and then one in communications. And when I first went to school, I went to school very close to my parents' house. So I was still always there. And it was really a way to connect as well as with my mom, because we were both accounting. She'd always want to help. And it's funny because she would try to help, and I don't think I always felt like, I don't think you know what you're doing. And it's funny because I have a degree in accounting, and when my wife went back to school, she had, there was a couple of classes, and I'm like, I don't know what the fuck I'm doing. Like, I think I should know what I'm doing. So it was just, it was almost an extension of that, but I still didn't really feel Filipino. I still, I hate to say it, but sometimes I was embarrassed to, be out with them, because when they would start speaking Tagalog to each other, and Filipino, they're very loud, right? I mean, you walk into a room, the TV's on like 30, and I'm like, why is the TV so loud? And so even when we got married, I think I got married at 30, and my mom, for very serious, said, do you want us to bring our karaoke machine to the reception? I'm like, no, why would you ever want to do that? Why would anyone do that? But when I went back, when I graduated, and then I worked as an accountant, and then after that, I kind of started going into writing stuff. I just wanted to do creative stuff. Well, of course, my income dropped severely. And so I went back to get my master's at Western Illinois, which was about an hour and a half from where I grew up. So it was still relatively close, but I was far enough away to kind of not go home all the time. And I had all purposes to go get my master's, but I ended up just getting another bachelor's, because master's generally, it's like, I didn't feel like I wanted to get a master's in accounting or business, and I really couldn't do anything completely different, because I don't know how curriculum is now, but like I couldn't just get a bachelor's in accounting and then a master's in like, science or something, it had to have been connected somehow. So I had these weird dreams. I wanted to go into television. So I took a couple broadcasting classes and ended up getting a degree in communications, but I started writing for the school newspapers really when I started. I think I got paid like, I don't know, like $8 a piece. And this was years ago. And so, but I got 400 words that I can just kind of express myself. And I wrote a humor column, but I was still an imposter. I had never spoken anything about Filipino. I never addressed my race, never addressed anything. It was just a straight humor column about stupid stuff. Seriously, it was years when I finally recognized myself as a Filipino. Really was.
What was that moment for you? What was that kind of like call of the wild?
I don't remember anything particular. I don't know if it was just because I got older. When I saw my parents getting older, and I really started to realize what they did was for us, and how, again, like floored I can't even imagine doing that. And I think it was me really getting past my own insecurity about how I felt about myself and them. I hate to say it, but when I think me thinking I was a white kid, it was an insult to them, and a lot of times they'd invite me to things, and I'm like, I'm not going to go to that, because first of all, you all know that, you go to a place where there's other Filipinos, they don't even speak English. If you don't understand, it's like a double Dutch game. You're looking for that little second to jump in and say something. I grew up learning it because our names didn't translate. So they'd speak Tagalog, and I hear Jason, I'm like, oh shit, I did something. That's how I started picking up these phrases. And now I'll say random things because I don't know. I can't even describe it. It's just really weird. But, with Vampires of Portlandia, even with past books, it's like they're always white protagonists. And it was because of how I saw myself. And, I never really thought, and I think it was partially because growing up reading books, I never saw Filipino kids. The books I read, there were never anything like that. So I never, again, it was one of those things I never thought it could happen. So Vampires of Portlandia came about because I finally just got to that point. Like, I just want to start seeing people, because it took me a very long time to finally accept it and identify with it. And, if you can put these characters in books and get kids like us started at a younger age, maybe that helps the transition, but I don't know. That's all we can do but that was kind of been my motivation, was to just, every book I write now is going to have a Filipino character in it.
Yes. Yeah. So I guess maybe those two things were sort of related, like you're coming to terms and embracing your Filipino culture, and then you're beginning to kind of write about, a Filipino protagonist, family.
Right.
I read your book.
Yeah.
You what kind of inspired? Like, what made you want to write Filipino Twilight? Oh my God! Look, there's vampires, there's romance, there's weird beasts. Own it. There's a vampire baby, like king. Like, come on! I want that on the back of the book.
I never read Twilight. Okay, first of all.
You can put it there.
It wasn't. It was for 16-year-old Tina. That's what it was.
So, what's funny is because my favorite movie is The Lost Boys. That was my era. And I love like Lost Boys, Beetlejuice, Goonies, these Ghostbusters, these kind of fantasy type stories, but more urban type humor. I think my forte is humor. I think if I had to, gut wrenchingly picked one thing I had to do, I would probably try to be a humor writer of some sort. And I think there's some humor in Vampires of Portland, and there's very subtle nuances of it. But the reason I wrote it was one of my favorite, aside from Lost Boys, is I love the show Supernatural and the show Grimm. And I don't know if you ever watched Grimm, but Grimm's was filmed here in Portland, based in Portland. And if you watch the show, there's Sergeant Wu was the Filipino sergeant who, had a very recurring role, but, not a main guy, but he's had his own glory. Well, one episode was based off him. He saw an aswang. And when he started talking about trying to describe it to the two detectives, Nick and Hank, I remember my wife, who's white, asked me what it was. I'm like, I have no clue what that is. I never even heard of that term. And so I called my dad and I said, hey, have you ever heard an aswang? And just very casually, he's like, yeah, it's just a story your grandmother tells you just to scare you. Like, what the hell is this? And so I just started reading about it, and I was just fascinated with it. And I'll tell you right now, the book, I think you'll either love it or you'll hate it, just like Twilight. You either love it or you hate it, because it's very Americanized. So, for someone who never been in the Philippines, it's very surface level introduction. It was more of, how am I going to bring this folklore into a story with things happening that people can relate to it, as opposed to being a very in-depth analysis of the creature and the folklore and all that. And so I kind of wrote it like a movie. I wrote it scene by scene, and the goal was to digest it as if you're watching a movie. Like, you could just kind of watch it happening versus reading it. So that was why I want to write it. I thought it was just a neat story. I love the movie Lost Boys, and Grimm was a big one. I live in Portland, and where else could a family of Filipino vampires reside in and blend in? Portland, Oregon. So.
City of weirdos.
Weirdos.
That's cool.
So I'm sorry.
I didn't want to cut anybody else off.
Yeah.
I was getting ready to drop a question. Let me put that in my time. Okay. So, so Vampires in Portland, but then I'm amazed by the story, like you said, that you're somewhat going to write. It's not really based on your parents. Well, it's based somewhat on the story, but then it's its own story in itself. Your two other projects that you were talking about, but like, I'm just so fascinated about the sacrifice that your parents did and you coming here, and how you're gonna. So, can you tell us about what parts? So, I'm assuming that some of that part is going to be there, but then it's a whole story on itself. If you can maybe talk a little bit on that project and the other.
About my parents coming over.
Yeah.
So it's funny because I finally got in the mindset of trying to. Wanting to write the story. For years, I thought it would be the neatest story to write, but I don't think I was just disciplined or ready to do it. And so I think it was back in 2017, 16, 17, I started researching it. I started watching all these documentaries and watching all these interviews and kind of just putting this timeline together of what happened. And then using my mom and dad's story as just kind of, my own timeline of what the story's going to be. So loosely, it's based off them leaving the Philippines and coming here. And that's really what it was going to be about, kind of a love story, like a historical book with a love story surrounding it. So when, they always used to talk about it. And once my mom get talking about it, she'll, like I said, pepper in some detail, like as if she's just remembering something, whatever. But when I finally told them, I think I want to write the story, and I asked my mom if I could interview her, she was very standoffish, very resistant to it.
Oh.
And to a point where I'd like, can I come over and interview, whatever? And it was an excuse. It was something. And so finally I just emailed her some questions, whenever you get a chance, do it. She never did it. And thinking about it, I a lot of these interviews I watched on YouTube about people who were there or, went through it. A lot of the common theme was they still remember, like it's still very impactful. They still have family. I mean, the Marcoses are still in power. They're still, the kids are still in power.
So
and they have family. Yeah, it's very traumatic. And I don't know if that's still based off fear because, they have family there or something, like they didn't want to talk about it, or I just kind of liken it to like someone in the military, so it was a very traumatic time in your life, whatever the circumstance was, and you don't want to talk about it. So I kind of just, I didn't want to throw them under the bus or, include their story without their, without them being, allowing me to do it or, giving me permission.
Giving you the blessing.
Right, the blessing, exactly. And so it was really just based off a guy who, and I totally made up this opposition group about a guy who couldn't go to school anymore. His father dies. His father ran a rice farm and his only way out was to go to school. So he lived in a small little village and he ended up saving up enough money to go to University of Manila or, Philippines of Manila. And so he loved the big city and kind of was just there and trying to build his own life. Well, then his mom calls him and tells him that his father dies and he needs to come home and run the rice farm. And he's in this dilemma. Like I wouldn't even know the first thing to do to run this rice farm. So he ends up going back to basically get it ready for sale. That's the best thing he can do. And then Marcos takes power. Like he's like literally, his dad dies as Marcos is taking power. And so a lot of Marcos's policy was to industrialize Manila, like kind of, get rid of the farms and, start doing more commodity type, electronic type stuff like that. And so he's talking to a neighbor kid whose brother couldn't afford tuition anymore because of the tuition rates were going up and, a lot of these things were impacting. He kind of attributed it to Marcos being the reason. Well, he still had connections back to the university. That was kind of his friend. So he ended up working as a courier for the Manila Times and then part-time delivering food from food carts and stuff like that. So when he was in the city, he used it as a time to go meet his friends from school. Well, one of his best friends was a political science major. And so he was always actively knowing what was going on with, in the country. And so as, they're conversing and they're kind of, what are you doing now? He's like, I don't know what I'm doing, sold the rice farm, don't really know what's going on. And his friend's like, well, I think you should come with us because we're going to go protest Vietnam. So a lot of these events in real life that happen were just convenient to the story. So he kind of just does that because it's a way for him to hang out with his friends and, it's a good cause according to his friend. And so he does. And then he just, I don't know if you've been to Portland, Oregon, or you obviously see what's going on here. There's two Portlands that if you ask someone outside looking in, it's the Cape Portland weird, Portlandia, or it's like, what the fuck is going on? Like there's federal cops, like what the hell is going on? And so he kind of just gets involved with this opposition group, and he and his buddy start recruiting people, and they just start protesting peacefully, only to find out that Marcos is, basically using the government to kind of what's happening here. It's just really weird. So, and then he ends up meeting the female who is kind of loosely based off my mom. She comes from a very high society and so the kind of conflict is he is just this poor, farmer's kid trying to go to school protesting, and he meets this kind of upscale socialite who is a nice person, but it's just a different world, so they look at things differently. It's not good or bad. She just looks at things differently, like why can't you go to school? And it's so easy for her. So there's kind of like two little storylines going on there, but it's really about him trying to stay in the opposition group, but falling in love, and she's trying to slowly pulling him out of it to the point where there's a similar scene at the end where it's a raid scene where they, the government raids the house and they flee to America, and that's kind of where it ends. Gotcha. So it's really just him pre-opposition and then getting out of it.
Yeah.
So
it's like a historical fiction love story type, which I think what's great about stuff like that is I look forward to hopefully, even if it doesn't work out, but I understand trauma if your mother finally gives the blessing or your family gives the blessing. But I think if just by virtue of at least telling somewhat of the story, it'll provoke people to then get the full details and learn the history for themselves. And that's what I'm hoping you're hoping with Vampires in Portlandia. If they don't know about a song, you get at least a taste, and then you'll do the research to learn more. And I think that's just what we can all do to get our culture out to the rest of the world in these small fashions. And I'm sorry, Viva, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just saying that you're telling your parents' story in the capacity that you can.
Yeah.
And I agree with what Patrick said. I mean, maybe that setting this love story with the backdrop of all that political turmoil, it'll let people see it. And once people start seeing it, they'll be able to come to terms with their own stories and their own trauma. So
yeah.
That's
a fascinating story too.
Not to go full psychology major on you or anything, but I think it was really interesting that you mentioned that your mom was very reluctant to kind of talk about the history, because in the Vampires of Portlandia, one of the plot points is that the main character Percival and his family think they are the only Aswang because their Lola just will not talk about where they came from or what their culture is or anything else. And maybe, that's an interesting parallel.
I never even thought about that. Maybe subconsciously.
Wow.
Reflects life. Or imitates life. Your truth is coming out in your art, is what she's saying.
That's right.
You gotta write what you know, right?
Exactly.
Look at you coming out, exploring your Filipino culture, exploring your family history. This is beautiful.
Yes. So going along with all that, you've done all this amazing research, which I think is great, and it just shows a commitment to the culture that you want to represent. Are there any other stories and any other stories from the Philippines as well that you maybe want to put together beyond what you already have planned out?
Not really right now. I have I have that one. I'm just trying to, I have a couple of drafts written, and I've had someone look at it already. But I want to go back to it. It's one of those. That's one of those stories I have to be in that mindset to do. But the one I'm pitching now is called the what I'm calling it is American as Egg Rolls and Rice. And it's really about a kid, kind of like me, who's just growing up as a white kid, but loves Filipino dancing. I love Filipino dancing.
Tininkling? Were you a tininkler?
Tininkling, planting rice, coconut dance. Oh my God.
Yeah, same.
And he's trying to not try to be this different person at school and not really acknowledge it. Well, I used to dance in this yearly folk festival, which was held at a middle school in our hometown. And I loved it. It was a weekend of just cultural stuff, all different types of countries. But I never told anyone about it. Right. So But it ended, like all things, funding, whatever, just we all got older and did other shit. And then a lot of our Filipino friends just started marrying white people like I did. And then the Filipino Association became the Filipino American Association. And now I'll go to these picnics every so often. And I'm like, God, there's less Filipinos, every time. It's now the kids are mixed, and some of them don't even look Filipino. They're like, God, that's a white kid. That's a white kid right there. So that's kind of what that story is. But the other one I started writing a couple weeks ago is about another Filipino kid who is rejecting his culture, and he has to do this research project on his family heritage, but his parents had just passed away in a plane crash. Yeah. And so now so there's a lot of food carts here in Portland, right? And there's a Filipino food cart that was by my office. I haven't been downtown since March because of COVID, but love this guy, great food. And the first time I met him, I don't carry cash, and I gave him my credit card, and he had just set up shop, and he's like, I don't have my credit card thing. And I'm like, and he did his Filipino thing. He's like, just take it, just go. And so, I would always tell my friends about him. You got to go there to get it, to kind of help his business. So this kid in the story, he loves this Filipino food. And he just kind of grows attached to this food cart owner. Then something happens, a robbery happens, and he discovers that this Filipino guy was secretly a superhero back in the day. And he stops being a superhero because there's a botched rescue, and he just kind of very trauma about it. So the kid is trying to coerce him to come out, but selfishly to help you use him as a means for a family heritage research project. And his justification is like, we're Filipinos, we're all related type thing, Anyway, it ends up backfiring. I have it kind of, about 15,000 words in it, so it might change.
Yeah, it sounds like a really fun premise, though, for sure. Right. We'll definitely look forward to it, especially as nerds of color. We love to see more superheroes of color.
Absolutely.
Which brings us to our last point, our nerd check. So let's pretend that you are getting your very own TED Talk. You can speak on anything that you are passionately nerdy about. What are you going to tell us?
Oh my God.
It doesn't have to be something you're the expert at. It just has to be something you're really into.
So one of my biggest things when I was a kid, and my best man at my wedding brought it up too. I didn't know he was going to talk about it, but when we were little, this is the one that we did the Transformers and wrote the lyrics to. Yeah, and we were in a band together. He was a drummer and I was the guitar player. And we loved the Super Friends. I don't know if you remember the Super Friends, right? So we used to draw the Super Friends, just a whole 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. And we used to draw these whole scenes, like every superhero on it. And I used to always draw Wonder Woman just sitting in the air. That's it. Because it drove me nuts that she was flying an invisible jet, but she wasn't invisible. We'd always have these bad guys on the ground level fighting, and then there was always one guy looking up, and in his bubble always said, "Who is that chick squatting at 30,000 feet?" And it was always just drove me nuts. So that would probably be my TED Talk. It's like, I know cartoons are fantasy. I know it's the whole idea of superheroes, but like, we still got to make it realistic, right? I mean, fiction, the difference between fiction and nonfiction is like, nonfiction is made up, but it still has to appear to be real. I mean, that's why Star Wars.
It's got to follow the rules.
Right. I mean, come on, like, really? That makes 0 sense. 0 cents.
I love that. That's so nerdy and specific. That's exactly what we were looking for. Thank you.
It's like Wonder Woman's not invisible when she's in her invisible jet. In this essay, I will.
Yes.
Right. Like, what was the point of the invisible jet? I mean, seriously, there's no point if you weren't invisible. It made no sense.
Yeah.
He's going to go to bed tonight like, oh.
Right. Where's our plane? Where's our plane?
Isn't she inside?
That's great.
Yeah.
Who's your favorite super friend?
Oh, Superman. Of course. I have a Superman tattoo.
Hey, okay.
It's actually of me as Superman. Yeah.
That's cool.
Iowa kid.
Awesome.
What's that?
Crash landed from a different planet. Look
Look at that. Camera down.
She was like Iowa kid because you're like the Kansas. That was your Smallville in a way. Yeah.
You worked at a newspaper?
Yeah.
The parallels, all the parallels.
Jason Tanamor.
Hey, you know what? This is a funny story. So Tanamor, obviously Filipino was owned by Spain, and a lot of the surnames are Spanish. So I never knew what my last name meant, right? So it means such love. Amor is love, and tan as an adjective in front of amor is such love. So my wife and I went to Mexico for our honeymoon, and when she would sign her name to our little things, they would like giggle, and they would like your last name. So like for that duration of that honeymoon, I would call her, her first name such love, So
That's cute.
Very sweet. All right. Well, Jason, thank you for your time. I will have the links in the description below for everybody watching this interview. Make sure you go to check out his website, check out Vampires in Portlandia, and tell him we want those other books too coming along, and just check them all out. Give him our love, and thank you again for blessing us with your presence, Jason. Appreciate you coming on. And when you have the next books coming, come on, let's hype it up, and we'll talk about it again.
All right, sounds good. Thank you.
I appreciate you, man. All right, boom. That is Jason Tanamor, author of Vampires in Portlandia and several other upcoming projects that we just discussed. Ladies, what do you learn from that one?
I thought, well, first off, can we talk about his family story? Because that was,
oh my gosh, yes.
That's so incredible. Like to have that kind of family history when he was like, yeah, I came to the Philippines and a couple months later I was born. It was like his mother was fleeing the Philippines pregnant with another child and her husband. Like, that's wild. That's,
oh yeah.
For them to have been political refugees and then settling in Iowa.
Yeah. Just because they somewhat knew somebody, which is
somewhat knew somebody and got there. And yeah, I was oof.
Oh yeah. And then just his journey very much mirrors ours as well. The whole basis of the show as mixed Filipinos, although he's full, but grew up in America. Yeah. He grew up essentially like you said, he identifies more as an American, as white side, even though he's full Filipino, but just grew up assimilated into this white culture. It's just now kind of awakening to learn more about his Filipino side, which, you're never too late. To anybody listening, watching this, the community is here. We're going to, and that's why we're doing this, to walk along our journeys together, me and the Ates, to learn about ourselves. So, learn, the community will come together for you. But yeah, I that's one of kind of my big takeaways is you're never too late to learn. I think, everybody that's watching this and who's seen some of our past interviews, everybody has their own different journey, and he's still definitely on his, and there's a lot to unpack there. And there's parallels that we're seeing from his art, which great point from you, Ates, from his material to him, that he's kind of finding out for himself. So we can only wish him the best, and hopefully he'll, learn and grow with that as well. But I think it's an amazing thing with him now discovering his culture, putting that into his work, whether it's all the way true or realistic in certain fashions and means. It's, because again, he's learning, so he doesn't know everything, but he's learning. It'll at least provoke people who, if you haven't touched the material, or if you hearing Aswang for the first time, maybe let me learn about it, like he did when he was watching Grimm and he called his father. And now with him knowing his parents' history, although he hasn't got the full blessing yet, which I would love for him to get the blessing. I think that, again, like you said, Tina, that was amazing. I think I'm a big history buff, and learning about our culture with that. Please, Mom, give him his blessing. That would be amazing, because that story needs to be told. But even if he doesn't, if it provokes people to learn about what happened, what went down, and that will just keep our people and our culture alive. And that's what we're doing.
Even recent history, right? Exactly.
Yes. So good stuff, man. And thank you again, Jason, for coming on and sharing with us. Can't wait to do this again with another story. We hope you'll check us out, but we'll let you know right now. Let's do it, y'all.
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry.
First, Cataphoric, you can find me on Twitter, TikTok, or Instagram. I also run the ShoPowSho TikTok. And if you like what you see or you want to see a little bit more behind the scenes, follow us on our Patreon or buy us a coffee.
Yeah, and I'm Viva Valentina. You can find me on Instagram and TikTok at viva.valentina and Twitter and chess.com at vivavalentinaxo.
All right. Make sure you follow the Lechon ladies, aka the amazing Ates. I am the Tocino Terminator, Kuya P. You can find me at Strange Since 1977 because, yes, as you can see, I'm very strange. And at Temple Far East, at the Nerds of Color, which is our main site from the ShoPowSho, and at the NRW at No Release Wednesday, where nerds rule the world. We thank y'all. We love y'all. Mahal kita. Salamat. Boom, boom.
I'm Jason Tanamor, author of Vampires of Portlandia, and you're watching the ShoPowSho. Does the fun ever start? Hi, I'm Jason Tanamor. I'm the author of Vampires of Portlandia, and my Filipino heritage is important to me because without it, I wouldn't be Filipino anymore.